Our friend Andy Kroll, Washington Bureau Chief over at Rolling Stone. Andy, good morning. Great to see you as always. Let's start with that stimulus. How do you kind of think that massive relief bill acted almost as a catalyst for the economy? How do you think it might affect the markets here?
Well, I think that the stimulus bill is now going into effect. We are finally seeing, after all kinds of legislative wrangling and maneuvering here in Washington, we're seeing the effects of those $1,400 checks in the pockets of Americans. It's boosting consumer spending. It's definitely boosting consumer spending among middle income and low income households as well. So they're taking that money and they are putting it, into consumer goods. They're putting it in some cases into paying off debt, but they are spending it, and it is moving, and it is doing what the Biden administration hoped it would do. And I think you're seeing an uptick in the markets. You're seeing a potentially massive jobs announcement today, between 600,000, maybe even 1 million new jobs added, according to some projections going into today. So if you're the Biden administration, if you are the Democrats in Congress who believe that the American Rescue Plan was going to give this economy a jolt when we needed it, you are hoping for good news today, but you're already seeing those green shoots of recovery already going into this jobs report.
Yeah, and Andy, on top of all of that, how much do you think schools reopening maybe contributes to some of this as well? Because you've essentially had parents who are exasperated having to basically work from home and teach their kids remote learning at the same time. Now you have kids potentially going back to school, teachers going back to school, and then parents basically getting their jobs life back. How much do you feel like that plays a role in all of this?
I think it absolutely plays a role in the optimism that you're starting to see grow among consumers and just the American population writ large. I mean, the juggling act that American parents have had to do for the last year is honestly kind of incredible, admirable. I can't believe some of friends of mine who have done this are still on their 2 feet after a year of doing it. I mean, I also, not to make everything about campaigns and elections, but I also think this is a huge political issue going into the midterm elections next year. I mean, they're still, 18, 19 months away. But this is a massive issue about reopening schools, making sure that reopening process is safe, getting back to some kind of sense of normalcy, and getting kids educated at such a critical part of their lives. So again, I think starting to get kids back in school is part of this sort of general optimism we're seeing, but it's got to keep going, and it's got to be done well so that there aren't setbacks with a fourth wave and some kind of school reclosures that would be pretty much catastrophic at this point.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the infrastructure plan here. Joe Biden releasing his $2 trillion plan earlier this week. Obviously, unlike the COVID, bill earlier, this one going to be a little bit more tricky for Democrats to get this done. Likely going to have to pass this through budget reconciliation once again. But Joe Biden essentially touting, Andy, that this is going to bring millions of jobs here, especially the union jobs as well, that we've seen a decline in enrollment in unions for the last couple of decades. If Democrats are able to get this done and across the finish line here, could that just be an added boon to the economy, especially the job market as well, for Democrats moving on here?
This $2.3 trillion infrastructure bill would be what Biden says is a generational investment in clean energy, in green jobs, in home retrofitting, home care services, rebuilding roads, rebuilding bridges. I mean, it is an infrastructure bill, but it is also a climate bill. It is a home health care bill. It's a rural broadband bill. I think they use infrastructure in the name in a very broad sense. And there's human infrastructure, technological infrastructure, climate infrastructure, you name it. But this thing is a massive bill, $2.3 trillion. This is not an American Rescue Plan where the urgency is we need to act on the pandemic and its effects now. As Biden says, he's comparing this to the space race of the 1950s. He's comparing it to the New Deal generation before that. And this is going to take a lot longer. Republicans have already come out and said they don't support the corporate tax increases, basically reversing the 2017 Trump tax cuts to pay for this bill, and that they don't believe that it should have all the things in it that it should, that it's a bit of a wish list for Democratic and liberal principles and ideals. So it's going to be a battle. I think the Biden White House, from what I'm hearing, from what I've read, believes reconciliation is going to be the way they're going to need to do this. And I do think the jobs report today bears on their political capital to get this infrastructure bill done. If this jobs report today is 750, 800, 900,000 jobs, the Biden administration can point to that and say, look, direct stimulus, the kind of going big approach, not erring on the side of too big, not too small, is working. It's putting people back to work. It is resulting in a massive uptick in the economy. Let's continue that with an ambitious infrastructure bill. And if the report comes in low today, it may take some wind out of their sails for that effort.
Yeah, so let's talk about the politics and getting this across the finish line, because we're already starting to see factions of the Democratic Party arguing about the size of the bill. You have progressives like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who says the $2.2 trillion, not enough. She would like to see $10 trillion spread out over 10 years. Then you have moderates who are saying, listen, unless you change the SALT deductions in this or other sorts of things in this bill might be too big for them to stomach here. Again, Nancy Pelosi can only afford to lose 3 votes in the House, and you can afford to lose 0 in the Senate. So even with reconciliation seeming like that's going to be the odds-on favorite to get this done, how do you see this playing out, Andy? Do you see this bill getting passed in its entirety the way Joe Biden has proposed it? And how do you see this happening, getting passed through the finish line here?
This bill is an opening offer. $2.3 trillion. It has all of the priorities that the Biden administration wanted when it was the Biden campaign. And again, they've made pledges about 10 million clean energy jobs. They made pledges about rebuilding bridges, roads, capping oil wells, all of those union workers who are in fossil fuel industries, putting them to work, capping wells or rebuilding infrastructure, or installing and building electric vehicle charging stations, tens of thousands of them around the country. This is the vision that we saw from the campaign now getting put into action. This bill is going to live or die, or most likely have its sails trimmed in the United States Senate. The Democratic House is going to have some liberal members who are going to critique it. But in the end, they like this package. They like how ambitious Biden is being here. Where we're going to see the real action is in the Senate. You have a handful of moderates there, names that your viewers have heard before: Joe Manchin of West Virginia, Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, Angus King of Maine, both senators from Delaware. These are senators who voted against the $15 minimum wage earlier this year. These are senators who are going to have to be won over, and maybe a couple of moderate Republicans too: Mitt Romney, Lisa Murkowski, Rob Portman. That is where the action is going to be. That is where the negotiations are going to take place. Joe Manchin, I know, wants a bipartisan bill. He wants everyone in a room negotiating this thing, trimming it down if need be, or adjusting it how they see fit, and passing it with bipartisan support. They can do it with reconciliation, with just Democratic votes. But as you pointed out, Baker, they can't lose a vote. It would be a tiebreaker with Senator Harris. And honestly, I think one Democrat walks away and the whole thing blows up. So there's going to be a lot of negotiations. It's going to take place over months. This is not going to be nearly as fast as the American Rescue Plan was earlier this winter.
Absolutely. Great insight there for us. Andy Kroll, Washington Bureau Chief at Rolling Stone. Thank you as always, Andy.